right. Hello, Gala.
Good morning.
Okay, what was that? Hello, Gala. Okay, good, better. First of all, I just want to say, Kate, you do not serve on the board, you lead the board, and you lead it so well. Incredible leadership. Kate, honestly, you're amazing. So as you heard, I'm here with Jocelyn. This is such a pleasure. You guys are going to hear the word board a lot today, right? This is a day to understand. Raise your hand if you like to be the boss. I think more of you like to be the boss. Okay, maybe you're like, I don't know, I want to be boss adjacent. Okay, if you want to be a boss, you're going to want to be on a board, and we're going to hear why that's meaningful today. First of all, I want to say hi to my daughter. Hi, okay. I have a junior and I have a 7th grade. I think they both want to be the boss. Anyway, so you heard from Kate. Jocelyn runs Illum, and Illum's mission, you're the founder and CEO of Illum and Illum Impact, and the mission is to expand access to corporate boardrooms and decision-making spaces. We're going to hear a lot about Jocelyn's career. Has anyone heard of Ticketmaster? Okay, Jocelyn's been a Ticketmaster. Who eats Papa John's pizza? Okay, she's on that board. Do you know what that means? She makes a lot of decisions impacting your pizza eating. So today, let's start first of all with, what is a board?
So the good news is all of those who put your hand down that you don't want to be the boss, when you're on the board, you're actually the boss of the boss. So it's a really fun role because you're guiding the company and you're not having to run the company every day. So that's how I would describe a board. It's a group of people, an ecosystem of leaders who guide a company. And they are in charge of the CEO of that company. In fact, they can hire or fire that CEO, and sometimes that's what happens. But it's really a role where, of course, you're looking out for the finances of a company, but the finances aren't really something that happens. Finances happen because of people, and people do the work. And so it's really an interesting role because you're actually spending most of your time guiding strategy, thinking about employees, thinking about policies, thinking about what's going on in the world and how that might affect the company.
So, boss of the boss. But you realized there was I don't want to say problem, but I'd love to hear, you in a TED Talk. Does anyone know what a TED Talk is? All right, everyone needs to check out Jocelyn's TED Talk. And in that TED Talk, she talks about walking into a board, and I will let her tell the story, and realizing nobody in this room looks like me. And what did that mean to you? So we'd love to hear about that.
Sure.
aha.
So this actually, I was living in LA, so yay, LA. And I was working at City Search at the time, which I am sure you have not heard of because it's old. But it was a company, and I was 28. And I was working with a group of people, and we had an idea. And so we closed ourselves in a conference room, and we were kind of brainstorming a new idea of what if we took Ticketmaster and City Search and we made it into a different product. And the CEO at the time said, wow, that's a really interesting idea. Why don't you come pitch it to the board? And that was really that moment where I was like, first of all, I didn't even really realize we had a board. I didn't know who it was. And I didn't realize how intimidating it actually would be to walk into a room where like everyone's kind of, like stiff and quiet, and you have to walk into the front of the room and give this idea. And there were no women in that room, and it made it harder, I think, for me to express this idea. I think it made me more nervous. I think it probably made me a little bit more uncertain that it was a good idea. But I did it, and because of that meeting, I got to move to London because they actually liked the idea, and they said, you know what, why don't you go give it a shot? And so it was a real eye-opener for me that one, boards aren't about how old you are. I know when we see boards in the movies, they're usually like 60-year-old white males playing the board members, and it actually looks like pretty boring work, when actually it's pretty exciting. And you'd argue that we need more diverse sets of experiences well beyond gender to help shape the companies that are really guiding our day-to-day lives.
So I want to sort of dig into that. Why do you think diversity on a board matters?
So I think when you're coming up with ideas about, and a lot of times you're thinking about the future, right? If everybody thinks the same, if everybody comes from the same background, the same set of experiences, it's really risky, actually, to make decisions from a similar way of thinking. Innovation is really spawned by new ideas, challenging ideas. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir when I'm telling you this. This school seems like it was founded on this principle of, look, you all come from different places and you have different sets of life experiences, and that influences how you think. So when you're put in a room, and these boards, some of them are only 3 people, some of them are 9 or 10 people, it's not a big group. And yet they're charged with making these giant decisions. So what you don't want is if all 10 of those people grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same college, have the same opinions about where the world is going, because guess what's going to happen to that company? It's going to become, one of those companies that doesn't make it, because business is hard and the world is changing, and there's lots of ways to think about. I love that we kicked off this morning with growth mindset. It's hard to have growth mindset when everybody thinks down a singular lane.
Yes, for sure. There's so much I want to cover, but I know you also mentioned how, when you think about even just today, when we're going out in the world, would we make decisions based on what that board looks like?
I've trained my daughter to.
Okay.
What's interesting is most people don't know who's on the board of even, the shoes you're wearing or the food that you ate for breakfast this morning. But those people are guiding what ingredients went into that oat milk you drank. Or, I often tell people when you can look, so public companies, you can look up and see who's on the board, but you'd be surprised. Right? When you go shopping and you're buying a piece of clothing, have you ever stopped to look and see who's on the board? Are there people on the board that look like the kind of people that should be making the decisions about that item of clothing? And you'd be surprised. So, my challenge to you is to hopefully leave today with maybe a little bit more interest in boards. Boards are not boring by any means. They are kind of this invisible room that most people don't get to see, but there's research you can do, and it is important who's sitting on the board. And in fact, it's in the news a lot now, actually.
That's right. So you spent a lot of time in tech, right, working in creating some really big names that I've mentioned. When did you make the transition to more of an impact venture with Illum?
Yeah, so this is a pretty life-changing story for me. And first of all, I fell into technology. So I'm definitely one of those examples from the beginning who did not know what she was going to be when she grew up, an English major who landed in technology at the dawn of the internet before anyone even really knew what it was, which was pretty exciting. But this idea came to me. I was part of a fellowship program, a leadership program, and they challenged us to start something that we thought would change the world. Right, no pressure. And I had never started anything. I'd worked at companies, I'd built stuff inside of companies, but I'd never started anything. And, I grew up in the South in the United States. It was rare in my community for women to have a career. Obviously, I did have a career, one I loved very much, still do. But I was the only in the room most of my career, and I just didn't want that anymore. And I wanted to see more women find careers that they really loved and get access to those careers. And so when I thought about that, there's a lot of things that you can go do, but that's what I would call systemic change, right? These are systems out in the world that we need to change, and the top of business is the boardroom. And what's interesting is I just went and interviewed 100 board members. And what I learned was no one was saying, we don't want women in the boardroom. The root cause is that they all just pick people they already know. And so that became a real eye-opener for me, which is like, all we have to do is get access to these opportunities, and then we can get the job. And we've proven that that works. Because guess what? There's a lot of smart women in the world, and getting access to the opportunities is really just about broadening their networks.
You've used a key word, and I want you guys to think about this idea of network. Of course, today is your opportunity to practice growing your network. You're going to be meeting all these amazing women. Introduce yourself, tell them what you're up to. But as one goes out in the world, and maybe you look around your community or your parents, friends, or whoever, and you're not finding that quote-unquote network, how can our girls develop a network?
So, I mean, a lot of it is exposure, opportunity, and advocating for yourself and what you're interested in. I mean, we just networked right before this talk, and we have a business meeting after this. Right. So you kind of never know who does what. You know, we were introduced because I was going to do this keynote. Well, it turns out what she does for work is relevant to what I do for work. But we wouldn't have known that had we not said out loud, here's what I do for work. Here's how it works. Here are the type of people that can help our work go forward. So I think a lot about networking is you kind of never know when you meet someone how they might help you in the future. And I don't really think of networking as, you know, put on a name tag, walk around a party, introduce yourself to 30 people and get notes. I find it's much more authentic than that. It's about being curious of other people and being forthcoming about yourself, right? So when you can stand with someone and authentically say, this is what I'm interested in making, I'm interested in doing, I'm interested in experiencing, then people listen to that. And then you do the same with other people. And that's really what networking is. I think it has kind of a bad name, or it can turn people off. But I actually think it's about human curiosity, and also knowing yourself and not being afraid to say those things about yourself, because most people want to help you. They really do. It can be scary to say, I want something, but most people want to help you get it.
I love the word curious. Exactly. We are curious about each other, and we do want to help each other. So I'm not meeting these people. So how would I reach out? Am I Googling someone I think is interesting? Am I dinging them on LinkedIn? Like what, even at this age, or maybe when I'm in college and I'm curious about a career path, do I reach out to someone who seems like they're working in that career? Like what are some other ways that wouldn't mean need to party or a physical meeting?
Sure. So I am a little biased. As much as I use digital technology, which I'm sure you all do, I still think humans connecting with humans is the most powerful force on the planet. So I think a lot of it starts with you. What is it that you want to do? Who are the types of people you want to meet? Then yes, maybe use those digital platforms to learn more about where those people gather. And then try to get yourself in those settings, and then do what I just talked about. Be forthcoming about what your interest is, what your wants are, what you're curious about, and make those one-to-one people connections. I think that's probably the most powerful thing that you can do. But I think the hardest part about what I just said is it really starts with you. And it really starts with you kind of looking inside and saying, what is it that I want to do? What is it that I want to learn more about? And sometimes that's the hardest part.
Right, exactly. So now you have found your way, obviously, in not only into boardrooms, but helping women get access to boardrooms. What is it about CEOs and that path of leadership that you as a board member are looking for, are trying to cultivate, nurture perhaps?
Yeah, I think for what makes a good CEO, there's so many things. It's really hard to be a CEO, let me tell you. You're responsible for
Do you guys know what a CEO is? Okay.
Okay, yeah. It's hard to be a CEO because it's kind of like you're in charge of everything, right? Yeah. And but I do think one of the words I would use in today's world is adaptability and curiosity, which we've said before. But it is crazy how fast, and you'll hear about this today from lots of people, right? How fast technology is moving. We're in another technology revolution. How the geopolitical situation is unfolding. So as a CEO, you know, the ones that I've seen are not strong are the ones that are like single-minded. The other thing I would say is human-centered is very important, because guess what? People make businesses, not the other way around. So if you're not aware of your people, aware of the type of people you have, the type of people you need, so those would be the qualities that I would look for in a CEO.
Got it. Who wants to be a CEO? Okay.
Yay.
All right. There we go.
We need
now,
you.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys know this, but our theme today is hustle with purpose, lead with confidence, make your mark. So we heard a lot about all the different ways Jocelyn was hustling. When you were a teenager, did you imagine this? So I know you sort of talked about different paths that you went on. What was your sort of imagination about your own future?
That's interesting. I think when I was a teenager and I look out in this audience and I think about all of you, I would have never, ever, ever predicted where I would land. What I will say is I always had kind of like wanderlust. I love to travel and I love to take trips, and those were always so inspiring to me, to meet people in different countries or even cities. And so that probably had a little bit to do with how my career unfolded, was that sense of adventure and wanting to, I grew up in Texas, and just as an example, most people did not leave the state of Texas for college because there's a lot of great colleges in Texas, a lot of great colleges in California, and it's hard to leave California. I live here now. But I did. I left Texas and I went to college somewhere else, and that was kind of the beginning. So one thing that was a pattern that I can look back and say stayed true was when I had the opportunity to jump on a plane and go somewhere, I said yes. And I think through those experiences, I was exposed to more ideas and I was exposed to more opportunities. But I did say yes to a lot of things that did not make sense.
And I think you mentioned this in your TED Talk. You probably said yes before you felt ready sometimes, or maybe not you, but I know sometimes maybe not you guys, but sometimes we're like, I'm not ready. I have to become an expert before I get that promotion or I get that opportunity. What would you say to that idea of readiness?
So I actually don't believe, we don't even use the term board readiness because it's way overused for women and underrepresented executives, and it's not used for white male potential board members. I think nobody ever feels ready for the thing that's going to challenge you. I have never felt ready. I still don't feel ready running this company right now. And I meet with women every single day, literally, who look at me and say, am I ready for a board? And then months later, they're serving on the board. So I don't think feeling ready is the goal. I think feeling ready to take on the opportunity might be, but if you're doing something you feel 100% prepared for, it's probably not the right thing for you to be doing. And I haven't met a lot of people who do feel that way, and I think half the time they're probably not telling me the truth when they do. And I can raise my hand and say, every opportunity I've taken, I have not felt ready, prepared, or qualified for. And while that is a little scary, it's also fun. Yeah.
So there's that hustle with purpose and make your mark. I'd love to take a couple questions, but I do want to end on this one idea. This idea when you hear no, because you're not always going to hear a yes, right? And that can feel a little tricky, and rejection is tough. How do you metabolize a no? And how do you what is that?
So I wish someone had told me what I'm going to tell you when I was your age, because I got used to no's in the last 7 years because I started a company. And when you start a company, you need people to believe in you, and you need funding, and you need all sorts of things. And I had probably 9 no's to 1 yes. So the first couple of months when I was trying to start this, I read into that, well, I'm probably not doing the right thing. I'm meant to do something else. This is not for me. I will not be successful. And then I actually read a book. It's a really nerdy book, but it's called, why am I blanking on the name? It's written by a hostage, Never Split the Difference. And it's a book about negotiation. It's written by a famous hostage negotiator, and there's a whole section on no. And when I read this, I was like, wow, When you hear a no in business, there's usually an open door for a different conversation. And that's how I started treating the no's. So if someone said, no, I'm not going to give you money for that thing, I would pause, I would gather myself, and I'd be like, I'd love to understand more about what was behind the no. And it was amazing what I started to learn about these no's. It was amazing how almost welcomed the no. But I will tell you, the first couple that I got were discouraging. I thought it meant something about me. I took it personally. So I think one of the most powerful things is that, one, there are typically in business more no's than yeses. And any entrepreneur will tell you that, but it's beyond entrepreneurship. So I encourage you to welcome the no in business and maybe try to find the ways to ask the questions around the no so that you can treat it as a learning opportunity. That's been a real game changer for me.
Okay, so no is power, right? That's fuel to get to your yes. Does anyone have a question? We only have a couple minutes, so maybe one or two. We have a mic in the middle. This is your opportunity to ask any question you have. Thank you.
Hi. When thinking of boardrooms and the decisions they make, what kind of comes to mind to me is like a type of decision making where people try to be as objective as possible and embody a broader viewpoint. However, like you've been saying, new and diverse perspectives and experiences are necessary for a successful board. When making decisions and creating new ideas, do you think it's more important to aspire to objectivity or to really rely on one's subjective experiences to evaluate these choices and ideas?
Thank you for that question.
Yes, thank you.
What a wonderful question. It's really funny because someone was asking me one time, can AI just be the board? And the reason it can't is because it isn't objective most of the time. The subjectivity around right, wrong, do this, don't do this, I think is actually 90% of the role. So I would say, obviously you need the objective knowledge and you can get that, right? Everybody here can read and, understand things. But wisdom, strategy, vision, those tend to fall more in that subjective category. I also think it's really important in boards that you can disagree. You're not aiming to all be, you have to align at the end of the day, but sometimes that comes after 3 days of discussion. So, thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one more question. Thanks for that.
Yes. So you talked a lot about networking, and I know a big part of that is the initial first impression, how you carry yourself, how you're dressed, and stuff like that. And I can see it in how you're just now it's very business, but it's bright, and it makes it seem like you are also a bright and welcoming person. But then you also talked about how when you had that presentation in front of the board before you were a board member, that you came in and you were the only woman there, and you were nervous. And I wanted to ask about how you got over that nervousness and became how confident and welcoming that you are now.
Well, thank you for that. I would say I still get really nervous. And I've heard this before, that this kind of concept of imposter syndrome. And someone said to me one time, they welcome it because it means they're doing something actually that's going to challenge them. So I don't know that the role is to not be nervous. I think it's human to be nervous when you're in a situation that's new or challenging. I would say confidence comes from doing things over and over well. So maybe there's certain areas that I am confident because I've done these things over and over, but the first time I did them, I wasn't confident. And the first time I do anything, even, coming here today, I'm nervous. Is anyone gonna find boardrooms boring? Why did they pick me to be the keynote? So I'd say to you, I do think first impressions are kind of important, but I'd love to think beyond that. I think many times people on a first impression, maybe they are quiet or maybe they don't say as much. So I think all of you should give yourselves more than just a first impression. I think all of you should recognize that we're all nervous a lot of the time when we're doing something that's challenging or new, and that's human and okay. Breathing's important. So, I always teach my children, just put your hand on your stomach and take a deep breath. But if you're doing something that makes you nervous, chances are it's also probably exciting.
Okay,
Thanks for the question.
Well, Jocelyn, that was incredible. So you didn't need to be nervous. That was really amazing for you to paint that picture about what leadership looks like, about taking that leap, and about aspiring to those rooms, right? So I challenge you all to use this day to practice networking, what Jocelyn talked about. And we're incredibly thankful and honored that you came to be with us. And can everyone give Jocelyn a big round of applause? Thank you.